Hello again. This is our third video on market trends and drivers. And this particular video is a little longer than the others. I'll warn you about that now. I'll do my best to cover things as quickly as possible so that we'll take no more time than necessary. But the subject of this video is a big one. It's about trends in energy production, consumption, prices. As you're aware, we have all sorts of new energy and declining energy sources in this country. And there are so many, and there's so much going on that this video will probably take just a little longer than the others. But it's important because a lot is going to change and already has been changing. So with that, I guess the best thing to do is just get going here. Let me see again if I can get things to happen properly. Every once in a while, I don't do it the right way, and then I kind of wish that I had. Let me see if I can just get this thing. There we go. Okay, so we're talking about energy sources and the supply of energy. And much of the information that I'll be using and showing you has been produced by the Energy Information Administration, or Energy Administration Agency, depending on how you refer to it. Recently, an analysis was done by EIA that has projections through 2025. And I'm going to be drawing upon that resource quite a bit. One thing that I do need to mention, though, and that is that this was produced before the recent coronavirus pandemic. And so as a result of that pandemic, as I'm sure you're aware, many of the uses of fuels, such as airlines, were curtailed quite a bit. And so some of the graphs that we'll look at don't take that into consideration. At the very end, there's a brief slide or two that was put out more recently by EIA that just changed its projections a little bit. However, what we're interested in here is the long-term outlook for energy production and consumption from various sources. And because we're looking at the long-term trends, the temporary shifts in supply-demand balances are less important. They're important, all right, but they're just, for our purposes, not quite as important. You'll see that this is this slide came from the EIA's forecast slides, PowerPoints, and the projections in this particular case went through 2025. And I'll just read these few words. Crude oil, growth in production of U.S. crude oil and natural gas generally continued through 2025 as a result of development of tight oil resources. Tight oil resources are oil and natural gas that's in the ground rather than out in the ocean. In prior years, a lot of our crude oil and natural gas, but crude oil especially, came from wells in the ocean, and they were quite costly to put in place, but the deposits of oil were quite large, and over time, the cost of constructing those large wells and their extraction devices could be spread over large amounts of production. Nevertheless, the cost of extracting that petroleum was really high. The cost keeps going up because the remaining reserves are deeper, and more recently, deposits of oil and natural gas relatively close to the surface of the ground have been discovered. They're not as large by any stretch as those in the ocean. They're in tight bands, very often parallel bands, and small pools within the ground. But the cost of getting to them isn't as great by far as it is out in the ocean. When the price of gasoline, which is produced from crude oil, was very high, then that was, and the price of crude oil was very high, then producing oil from wells in the ocean wasn't a problem. But with the lower price of crude oil and gasoline today, it's a lot easier and more economical to drill from tight oil deposits, as they're called. And the technique that is used to bring those oils to the surface, you may have heard, it's called fracking. Water and chemicals are injected into the ground, either above or below the band of petroleum, and the shale rock where the oil is deposited is cracked or fractured, thus the term fracking. If the deposit is natural gas, the pipeline is above the deposit, and when the shale is cracked, the natural gas seeps up in to the pipeline as it moves upward. If we're talking about crude oil, the pipeline is below the deposit, and when the shale is cracked, then the oil seeps down into the pipe and is recovered that way. In any event, during this period, the EIA projects that consumption here in the US will decline. We'll see why as we go through this. So as production goes up and consumption goes down, a surplus results, and the U.S. becomes a net exporter of gasoline and more likely crude oil to other countries. So with that, we can get started with the PowerPoints. But I think this little slide by the EIA helps us get started. Something else I guess I better mention now is that the graphs that are produced by the EIA are kind of busy. They've got a lot on them. There's always I'm trying to think of the right word now, but a best guess. That best guess, there's a word for it, and we'll get to it on the next slide, I guess, because it's escaped my mind right now. And then there are other forecasts on the slide that represent what would happen if there's a larger or smaller supply produced from drilling, and the prices are higher or lower. So there's a best guess, and then there are alternative forecasts. And when that is the case, I'll be talking primarily about the best guess on the graph. In any event, here we see the EIA's forecast for production. You can see that the production of crude oil in the center line has been going up here for quite a bit. It's expected, remember, we don't have the pandemic reflected here, to keep going straight up. It probably won't go up at quite that pace just because of the pandemic. And then when it reaches a certain level, it just sort of plateaus and doesn't go up anymore. However, there are a couple items that do continue to go up, and they will go up even during the pandemic. One of them is natural gas, and the other is renewable, solar and wind. You can see that the demand for nuclear power doesn't go up much. As a matter of fact, it goes down. It doesn't change much. And this gray line here is for coal. And as you know, there is a lot of difficulty with coal because when it burns, it produces a lot of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, which are causing the earth to get warm. And that in turn causes a number of the problems that we've already talked about in earlier videos. So that's the production picture in general. The sources of consumption are rather interesting in this slide. What we usually think about is gasoline for our cars. And in this forecast, because the vehicles are more efficient, because we've got more in the way of hybrid and electric battery cars, but also because fuel consumption standards are getting tougher now. Consumption by cars is expected to decline over the projection period. On the other hand, industrial consumption of fuels, oil and gas, is expected to continue rising. And again, we might see a little bit of a decline due to the coronavirus. Electric power has been coming down as a result of efficiencies and design of electrical machinery, and the operations of industrial plants. Also, the transfer of production offshore. But at a point somewhere near the end of this decade, then the consumption of fuels and energy will, as a result of electric power generation, will go up. So here we have electric power, industrial, and transportation. The other lines here I'll let you look at later. Here's a very interesting chart. It's interesting to me because of what the cost of natural gas does over time. And you can see that the cost line for natural gas, the brown line, is the same in all three of these charts, and it goes down. And so natural gas becomes, is already very attractive from a cost perspective, and is expected to be more so as time passes, as we move toward 2050. But natural gas is quite affordable today. And we'll see what the result of that is as we move through the slides. The green line represents the cost of producing electricity with wind, and the yellow with solar. And we can see that over the years, it's expected that the cost of solar power is going to go down as well, again, due to engineering and the design of natural gas systems. Now, the next two graphs to the right, the one in the center and the one on the right, indicate what will happen if the availability of renewables, that is wind and solar, is either less or more than expected. I'm sorry, the cost is less or more than expected. So in the center chart, we see what will happen if the renewables costs are lower than in the reference case. That's what I was trying to come up with the term. Whoa, with the term I was trying to come up with earlier, the reference case. So over here we have the reference case that is the best guess. And here we have an estimate of what will happen if the costs of wind and solar power are less than the reference case. And you can see that they catch up with natural gas sooner. But by sooner, we don't want to get too carried away. That'll be perhaps 2035, something like that. However, remember, that's an optimistic projection. If, on the other hand, renewables remain at the current cost and improvements are not made, then we can see that those costs will just flatline, and that'll be the result, of course, of not making improvements in the design of those systems, which is not a very realistic assumption. So here we have then the outlook for crude oil production and natural gas production. On the left, crude oil. Right now, we're in a situation where the supply of crude oil and natural gas, which usually occurs in the same place that crude oil occurs. It's often the case that when we recover crude oil, we get natural gas with it. I used to be a management consultant and traveled to several parts of the world and the United States. One of the places that I did business was Texas, and I can remember driving along the highway outside of Houston at night, looking out into the distance where these refineries had these great big stacks. They weren't smokestacks, they were natural gas stacks. And at that point, way back then, there wasn't much to do with the natural gas. And so at the top of these natural gas stacks were flames. The only way to get rid of it was to burn it. Today we realize that we can do a lot better than burn it. We can capture it and use it to produce chemicals as well as condense it and ship it to other countries to use for power. And of course, we can use it here in our own country to provide the the power or the energy to serve as fuel for our electric gas plants. And so today, natural gas is abundantly available, as is crude oil, and consequently, we're making great use of it. In any event, the crude oil production chart on the left again has several scenarios. The black line is the reference case, and again, it represents high supply, and as a result of that, low prices. But as the economy recovers, then we would expect to move back up toward a more normal situation. Now, so the production is pretty high, but unfortunately the prices, unfortunately for the producers, the prices are kind of low. So to the extent that we have a larger supply, then we have larger production is possible. The only way that production continues at a high level is if the prices are high enough to support that. And that today is not the case. So we've got low oil prices, and yet we've got abundant supply. And so that creates a somewhat unnatural situation. In any event, don't forget that with the pandemic, we can sort of expect and see a low price for fuel, and indeed we have, and as a result, although we have large supply, the industry is certainly not as profitable as it used to be. The graph on the right is much less interesting. It just shows an increasing supply of natural gas, and really depends upon the availability of oil and gas, and the extent to which prices are high, which encourage producers to produce more oil, crude oil, along with which we get the natural gas. Today, however, prices are quite low. So there's less incentive to produce, but surprisingly, the production continues to be pretty high, not just in the United States, where production has come down, but in other parts of the world, particularly the Mideast, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, where there are large petroleum deposits as well. So here we have crude oil and natural gas liquids. The liquids, of course, are what we think of most of the time. And again, we can see that same pattern that we saw in the last graph. One interesting point is that, whoa, I'm sorry, back in 1970, when we were recovering petroleum from wells in the ocean and in larger quantities, and the economy, the U.S. economy was growing rapidly, crude oil production was a lot higher than it was back in 2010. So we've just started this recent increase in production in the last decade. Incidentally, the production of crude oil without taking into consideration natural gas is the lowest line on this chart. Oil and gas combined, if there's a lot of it, we have that same line that we saw earlier with larger amounts of production, and the reference case is the one in the middle. So production, the increase in production has been largely due to natural gas. In any event, you can see that we've been in a increasing trend, and then you may recall we're about to hit that plateau. And in fact, due to the coronavirus, there's been a dip already. So when we get to this level, it won't have been because we have risen to it. We've dropped, and but as the economy recovers, we'll move back to this best guess, the black line, the reference line. Over here on the right, we see consumption. And again, it really depends upon how fast the economy grows, how high the price is. If the price is low, consumption goes up. If the price is high, consumption stays down. If the economy does not grow rapidly, consumption won't grow as it will if the economy increases. So and there's quite a wide variation here between high and low availability and high and low prices. One rather interesting result of discovering oil in terrestrial sources is that the importance of those sources as opposed to sources of fuel, of petroleum in the ocean has changed a great deal. You can see that back in the early 2000s, the deep sea drilling was more important than terrestrial. However, with the discovery of these fracking techniques, recovery of tight oil bands in the ground has become more and more important until, as you can see now, they are by far more important than sources in the ocean. Although we do see increasing production from the Gulf of Mexico here. But it's those tight oil deposits that account for the majority of growth in the foreseeable future, according to the EIA, and we can believe them. Now, what will happen if we have low oil and gas supply is there will simply be less production of tight oil and probably less exporting. On the other hand, if we find even more, if the deposits that we're drilling in now last longer than expected and they're more productive, then we get really a very large space of production here on the right side. But again, the reference case, our best guess, is the one on the left. Here in the here's a map of locations of these tight oil deposits and shale gas in the United States. The largest currently is the Permian here in Texas and Arizona. And we'll see a graph in a minute that demonstrates just how much larger production from the Permian is currently than from these other deposits. However, the Niobrara, the Permian, and the Marcellus shale and Utica, but Marcellus is where we find a great deal of natural gas. So much here in Appalachia that it becomes very easy to supply energy in the eastern United States from natural gas. So here's the little graph that I think I mentioned a couple minutes ago that demonstrates, you can see the Permian has become the #1 source of crude oil drilling, at least crude oil in the terrestrial sources as opposed to ocean. Eagle Ford is also pretty good sized, but the Permian seems to be where a lot of action is. And then you can see over here on the right where the Niobrara, the Permian, and over here there aren't a lot of these little dots indicating where the natural gas is, but rather this chart down below shows us just how much natural gas is being produced in Appalachia, and it's quite a large amount. Here we simply have a little graph that shows geographically where those deposits are. Not a great deal needs to be said here, except that in the Permian we have this increasing trend. And again, it doesn't look like that today because we've had this drop due to the coronavirus and the pandemic. But it'll move back up to this level quite quickly next year probably, and then just sort of stay at its capacity, but it stays there for a very long time. So the Permian's a big deal. Now, wherever these deposits are, it's worth making a particular point. Where there is production of oil and gas, there are pipelines, there are refineries, there are plants that convert the natural gas and some of the crude oil into chemicals. And certainly here in the Permian, where there's a lot of growth going on, what else do you think is going on in these regions? I hope you're telling me that there's home building. People are moving into these areas and have moved into them. There's been a lot of growth of population, home building, a lot of consumption of pumping, machinery, piping, and down here on the coast, where also we've got the Gulf of Mexico and more production. There's a whole lot of machinery and equipment here used to condense natural gas so that it can be put onto ships and sent across the ocean to customers in Europe and elsewhere, Asia. Here in the Northeast, this has become one of the reasons for energy costs being kept under control in the Northeast to the extent that it is. So there are major economic and marketing consequences in the areas where these deposits are located. So we don't think of them as, at least when we're talking about marketing, simply as locations of petroleum, but magnets for economic, industrial, and marketing activity. And so to the extent that we see this pickup here in the northern Great Plains. That means that northern Great Plains will, where the Niobrara is located, we're going to see pickup in economic activity there. Gulf Coast already has enjoyed that a great deal. You can see how there was a lot more activity back in the early 2010s, and the Gulf Coast region really benefited from that. But in the Southwest, we've seen this rapid growth and continuing growth. So Houston and the Southwest areas are enjoying the consequences of that. So be sure that you appreciate the fact that there's more than just oil going on here. There's economic, industrial, and marketing activity. In this chart, we see the natural gas production, and on the left, and the relative importance of natural gas in the Southwest, where the Permian is, and the East, where I discussed the Marcellus Shale region with you. You can see that great big green swath in the northeastern part of the United States that where production of natural gas occurs, and of course that's great for the people who can benefit from it there. Over on the right, we simply see the types of product that are produced from natural gas. These have different uses industrially. Ethane even can find its way back into production of gasoline. However, each of these types of chemical is produced from natural gas. Okay, I don't think we need to go into the various categories. You recognize propane, of course. Propane is delivered to many homes and used as a natural gas for, among other things, cooking. Here's a chart that shows the capacity utilization of refineries in the United States. And we see that over time, the utilization of capacity as the demand for these products subsides somewhat, and yet we're producing somewhat more. What happens is that we have this surplus production, and it becomes available for export. And so as we produce more, and consume less, we have this amount available for export. Over here on the right side, we see the EIA's projection for diesel fuel exports and imports of oil on the other hand. The exports are what's interesting, primarily because, to me, because we know that the coronavirus and the pandemic have affected consumption all over the world. And I think probably that when this chart is produced again, we won't see such a sharp spike in diesel fuel exports. But as we move through time, we'll get up to this level. And because we have a surplus of production versus consumption, we have a new market, a petroleum export market. In years gone by, we were a net importer, now a net exporter. This works to the advantage of the United States economically. Also, it creates demand for all of the machinery and equipment and infrastructure that is necessary to condense natural gas and to locate and to put diesel fuel into tankers, ships, in order to deliver it in other countries. And that provides demand for quite a lot of infrastructure and interior development, especially down in the Southwest. Okay, here we have retail prices for the gasoline that you and I buy on the left, and the reference case looks pretty reasonable to me. Actually, it doesn't. The reference case does not look reasonable. The low oil price does, and the reason we have this low oil price today is the pandemic. And so today, you and I are paying just slightly over $2 a gallon for gasoline. But as the economy recovers, we would expect to see prices gravitate back up to the reference level. Still not very high at $2.50 a gallon compared to where it's been in the past. If you look over to the left of the dotted line, you'll see what I mean. The chart on the right simply reflects prices for diesel fuel that is obviously used by trucks and heavy machinery, but also the price that we hope we can charge customers in other countries. Actually, we would charge them a little bit more because we have to transport the fuel to those markets. But the international marketing of petroleum products is now becoming more important to the United States because the US is now a net exporter. So here are natural gas prices depending upon whether we find a lot or don't find as much. Here, I think the reference line is still pretty good because and by the way, you can see that line, that black line, that's been rising since about 2005 and is projected to continue rising. And that's because prices for natural gas are lower than competing fuels, and because natural gas is a lot cleaner than coal. And so in electric power plants, electricity generating companies prefer to convert their plants or to build new plants that are powered with natural gas rather than coal. But the other lines on this chart reflect the possibility that we are able to recover more natural gas and oil or less. In any event, this is simply a chart showing the amount produced, but you can also see that the range of possibilities is quite wide, from over 50, maybe 55 trillion cubic feet, all the way down to maybe 32. So that's a very wide range. The spot prices are sort of in the inverse. If the supply is low then prices will be higher. If the supply is higher than expected, then the prices will be lower. And the reference case is probably pretty reasonable even during the pandemic because of the steadily increasing demand for natural gas. Something that we have to come to grips with is the fact that eventually we're going to start to run out of these sources of energy. And here you see the peak oil paradigm, I think you would call it. This is based on a model of these sources running out. The reason I use more reserved language here is that we've gone through these curves before. Peak oil at one time was supposed to occur about 20 years ago, and then 10 years ago, and so forth. Now it's expected to occur 10 years from now. And that simply is because we have continued to find more deposits of petroleum. However, at some point, we just won't find any more. And or we will not want to make use of them. So the bottom part of this chart represents, the blue segment represents consumption of coal. And you can see that it does decline in time, but right now, very interesting. I hope you can see it, but you see right now, we're in a period of rising coal consumption. And yet you hear that we are not using and don't want to use as much in the United States for power generation. So why would coal production increase and consumption increase? And the answer is that this is a chart of the world's consumption, in this case of coal. And coal-fired power plants are being built as I'm speaking to you now throughout China and in India. Where there simply is or are large deposits of coal. And it takes a little more engineering to develop more sophisticated power generation plants that don't use coal. Some, in fact, use oil, but coal is still the preferred use in China and India, especially India. And that is expected to continue for some time. We expect that China will move away from coal faster than India because, as you've probably heard, China is really going all out for solar power. We see the consumption of oil getting larger. See how wide this band is as in developing countries, especially, more industrialization occurs and more consumption of vehicles occur. Here we have natural gas, and it peaks a little bit later. I don't know if you can pick this up, but the green peak occurs a little bit later than the blue peak, and so forth. So each one of these peaks is occurring a little bit further in the future. Biomass is the band, the orange band. And fuels made from biofuels are, among other things, widely used in South America, particularly Brazil. Now, as we go off to the right of this curve, what happens? Coal, oil, and even natural gas fall away. And we're left with the alternative, the sources that are alternative sources today: solar in the gray band and biomass in the orange band. My guess personally is that we'll also see a resumption of nuclear, but right now that's not being reflected in this projection. The reason I think nuclear will pick up is I think there are some new designs of nuclear power plants that are much safer and essentially can avoid the threat of a breakdown of a nuclear power plant that creates a threat of nuclear radiation, lethal radiation. So we have this issue of peak oil demand and peak petroleum demand. But for the foreseeable future, worldwide, the demand for coal, crude oil, and natural gas will continue to increase. And you can see that the width of the band for natural gas gets to be a whole lot larger than it used to be. Here we find then the consumption of natural gas by various sources. You can see that the residential, the red down on the bottom, just stays pretty flat. If you remember our discussion of population in the United States, that's no surprise. As a matter of fact, because of people moving into the city, I would have actually expected it to be a little, to get to be a little more narrow. The pink bar is commercial, and again, stays pretty stable. But natural gas used for electric power is increasing. If we come over to the dotted line here, we can see how much it's increasing, and we'll see why in just a minute. Also, the use of natural gas in buildings, in industrial buildings in particular, and liquefaction of natural gas that is then able to be shipped to other countries is the top bar here. So in any event, we do see that it's the industrial and electric power sources of demand that are responsible for increasing consumption of natural gas. The industrial consumption of all energy is again subject to a variety of assumptions, but they all increase. So as the economy increases, it consumes more energy, of course. And if we have high economic growth, it could be that the demand for energy will be a great deal more than our mainline projections. So we have a contingency there. And to the extent that that contingency occurs, instead of being a net exporter, we'll just be consuming a great deal more. Here we have the electricity generated by renewables as well as natural gas. And by renewables, we're referring to solar power and wind power. We can see if in the left chart that natural gas since 2010 has been increasing. Currently, it's about 37% of energy consumption, and it's likely to stay at about that level, you can see. On the other hand, the projection for renewables goes up quite a bit. It doubles in this projection from 19 to 38%. Nuclear declines and coal really declines. It falls in half. Maybe it'll fall more than that. We'll be getting into that in just a minute, but let's talk about the renewables here because the projection by EIA is remarkable in one way. First of all, we can see that electric power generation from renewables has been more from wind turbines than solar power. And at present, it is very much that way. But over time, the expectation is that electric power generated from solar sources will triple proportionately from 15% to 46%. And that's really something, isn't it? Now, remember that there's variation around these projections, and these are forecasts, in this case, to 2050. So we'll have to wait for the engineers to prove these forecasts correct. But in any event, if they are correct, then renewable fuels will become more and more important. That's good for ecology because it means that we'll be putting less carbon dioxide into the air by burning coal. And it also means that we'll have new markets and new industries. If solar and wind, for that matter, grow that much, then there's going to be quite a lot of demand for all the apparatus and machinery and batteries that are required for solar power plants and wind plants and the devices that enable power from those sources to be transferred into the national grid. So it's these are major changes in energy markets. Here we have some comparisons of electricity generated from natural gas and from coal, depending upon the assumptions in those forecasts. So the graph on the left, again, is the reference, the best guess. We can see what we've already seen, that is a growth in natural gas. Rather interesting, we've now got a plateau in natural gas here, perhaps due, I'm not sure what that would be due to. It's not due to the coronavirus because these forecasts were not produced, were produced before the coronavirus arrived. But for sure, as we develop these new deposits, especially in the Marcellus, then we see this this growing. Maybe I do know why. It takes a while for the coal plants to be decommissioned, taken out of service. You can see that that process is happening. And as that happens, until that happens completely, then the natural gas has a certain limit of demand that it can meet. Once most of the coal plants are taken out, that are the ones that are going to be taken out. Then the production of natural gas and electricity from natural gas, electric power plants fueled by natural gas picks up again. This is a set of projections, the one in the middle, that assumes that we're not going to find much oil and natural gas. And we know that that's really not the case, that we've got an abundance right now. To the extent that there is an abundance and the supply exceeds demand or gets close to it, prices go down and consumption really takes off. And so this, this forecast here over on the right may be closer to the real world because there's abundance of natural gas. And we have right now an abundance of oil from fracking. As a matter of fact, fracking operations, many have had to shut down because we just can't consume it all. And to the extent that natural gas is more affordable and the price is lower, then coal-fired electric plants are decommissioned faster. So here we have the price of natural gas at the Henry Hub, which is oh boy, I want to say Wyoming, but oh, it's in Oklahoma. So in Oklahoma, there are a lot of hubs where natural gas pipelines collect oil and natural gas and then carry it off to refineries and other distribution centers to take that natural gas and oil far from where it is originally recovered. But there's a sort of a hub of the wheel in Oklahoma. And so the prices at the Henry Hub are often quoted. Prices also are quoted at other collection points. This is just the most frequently quoted price. But you can see that if the supply is low, the prices will be high. And if the supply is high, the prices will not be as high. They'll be lower. And then we have our reference forecast, which calls for a fairly reasonable price, lower than in the recent past. You will see that it comes up sharply near the end of this decade, and that's because of the cost of decommissioning coal-fired plants and building new plants that are fired by natural gas. And so in this chart, we see the black lines below the horizontal line, the bars below the horizontal line. This shows the decommissioning of coal-fired electric plants. And you can see that that's been going on for quite a while. The black bars up above represent the addition of solar power generation. And then the light blue bars represent electric power plants that are fired by oil and natural gas. You can see that they also go up. Now, bear in mind that there's this wide range of possibilities, and to the extent that perhaps we're not as successful in generating solar power capacity at a low price, then we'll see the natural gas bar, the light blue one, be higher. On the other hand, if solar power becomes dirt cheap and we find very efficient ways of storing the electricity that is generated during the day so that we have it available when the sun isn't shining, then the black bars will be larger. But this is the best guess that I believe that the atomic that the um, Energy Information Agency provides us right now. In the event that, and this is another one of those charts that shows what would happen if there's a lower supply of oil and gas versus higher than expected. The reference case here shows that oil and gas will account for more of the added capacity than solar, but not by much. On the other hand, if there's a low supply of oil and gas, then solar will account for more. And if solar isn't as abundant of a new source as we expected, then natural gas will become even more important. Long story short, as markets and industries, both solar and natural gas are really important. All the machinery and equipment, all the engineering talent, all of the generating capacity that goes into these two industries represent very large markets, industrial markets. And this, by the way, represents additions, the amount of capacity that is added to our generating capabilities. Here is a chart that shows what's likely to happen to prices for energy, for electricity in particular. And you can see that the cost and therefore the price of electric generation is projected to actually decline. The cost of getting that energy from one place to another through pipelines and the like is expected to go up. But when you total these things up, pricing for electricity is expected to remain fairly reasonable. So although we're used to prices going up in most of the products and services that we buy, the price of electricity should stay fairly flat, fairly affordable. Here again, we've got what the results that would occur if there's an abundant supply of oil and natural gas. That's the lower line here, if I can get the arrow to point. On the other hand, if the supply is low, then the prices will be higher, and that's what the red line indicates. And once again, the prices are still dropping, but they're going to come up as the coal plants are taken out of commission and new gas-fired plants are put in service. This chart very simply shows what the outlook for coal-fired plants is. The dotted lines on the left here represent capacity and actual generation as represented by the solid lines below. Long story short, we have a lot greater capacity in electric generating capacity anyway. Then we have the need to generate. So when we look at the capacity utilization, we don't see any cause for alarm. Now, this has to do with coal-fired plants. And of course, we know they're being taken out of service. So no surprise that when we look over to the right, we see again a little spike as we're as the economy recovers, and as we begin to go through this transfer. But we don't really get much over 70% capacity utilization. In any event, I don't think I made it real clear at the beginning, but this entire chart has to do with coal-fired plants. And as you can see on the left, both the capacity comes down and the generation of electricity from coal-fired plants also goes down. So here is a projection of residential and commercial electricity prices. Here again, we see this little spike as after the prices are finished, come down as far as they're going to come. We see this somewhat rapid increase in prices temporarily, my best guess is that is for the allowance for funds used during construction. It's a special accounting device in the electric power industry when plants are being built and or decommissioned. Borrowed funds are charged the same way that expenses are. And so they add to the cost of the utility, and those costs are passed on to the consumer in the rates that they pay, AFUDC. It's an anomaly of that industry. But then you can see where it's over and the prices start back down again. Natural gas prices are going to rise gradually, but get nowhere near where they have been in the past. This is very affordable, and it makes natural gas for residential and commercial, both uses, appealing, attractive. And that's nice because natural gas, if we go back to where to go, that chart, when we're talking about coal-fired plants, those coal-fired plants are emitting greenhouse gases, aren't they? So when they come out of use, when they are retired, then the discharge of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere goes down too. So and we see that in this chart that the reduction of capacity in those plants is really substantial, and the reduction of production even more so. So this is an indication of a favorable development in ecology. Okay, another use, of course, for fuels is in transportation, and the big item, of course, is cars and light trucks, pickup trucks, and so forth. Light duty trucks are just as important as cars in the automotive market of the United States, not necessarily elsewhere in the world, but you can see that that's the big item here. Something else that you will note again is that these charts don't reflect the effect of the coronavirus, because if they did, this line for air travel, consumption, or passenger travel by air would drop right down to the level of buses or maybe rail, because air travel has just cratered as a result of the coronavirus. but within a couple of years, maybe a little longer in the case of air travel. I've seen one forecast that air travel won't get back to normal till about 2024. But eventually we'll get back up to a normal level of travel by air as well as auto. Interesting that rail freight, on the other hand, has picked up some of the air freight business, and rail freight is probably doing a little better than forecasted today. But in any event, these are forecasts that I imagine you would not be too surprised by. But transportation certainly is a major consumer of energy, and particularly petroleum energy, as well as now batteries. However, the efficiency, the rate at which energy is consumed and fuel is consumed by vehicles is declining because of advancements in engineering. And so we see that the fuel economy of light trucks, meaning your pickup trucks, and cars, the fuel economy is increasing quite steadily. It's even occurring in medium-sized commercial trucks, heavy trucks, not so much. Here's the outlook for, and I might add that this diagram produced by the EIA is a little difficult to follow, but this is the outlook for alternative energy-powered vehicles. So the yellow bar represents hybrid electric, but this light blue bar represents battery-powered cars. And I think that when it's done over, it's going to grow much larger. As a matter of fact, we'll see in the chart over on the right that that's the suggestion. And then conventional vehicles still representing a majority. But this is when this chart was prepared, the outlook for hybrid electric cars was the most favorable. But we now see the development of batteries that it looks like are going to go 1,000,000 miles, but for the time being 200,000 or 300,000 miles. And as battery capacities and longevities increase, then the cars that make use of those kinds of batteries will increase in production. So I think this is one chart that's going to need to be revised pretty soon by the EIA. You can see that over on the right, the projection for battery electric cars is expected to increase in time, and the 200 and 300 mile cars with 200 and 300 mile batteries, cars that can go 200 or 300 miles before being recharged, are increasing in this projection as well. So the total of, and I think I was speaking incorrectly a minute ago, this total line is the sum of the 200 and the 300 and the 100 mile cars, battery powered cars. So if you add these up, plus whatever batteries are in hybrid cars, you'll get the total. So this total line represents the growth in the width of this entire band of alternatively powered cars powered by battery and as well as hybrid. And again, my suggestion to you is that when this chart is done again, the hybrid band won't be as wide, and the battery-powered cars will be forecasted to be much wider. Incidentally, this plug-in hybrid is the little black line between battery and hybrid, in case you didn't pick that up. So the EIA has recently updated some of its forecasts and basically recognized that the economic activity as or declining economic activity has resulted in reductions in energy demand, that the price of crude oil has come down, but by 2021 will increase by over 20% from an average of $43 per barrel to 50. If that is true, that will increase the production of oil and natural gas, because more operators will be able to afford production and produce at prices that exceed cost of that production. The EIA stated that it expected gasoline prices to decline, and in fact that turned out to be right. These are the prices that we are seeing at the pump today, and the EIA forecasts that we'll see prices go up to $2.25 in 2021, which is really is still not too bad. So this is a little graphic that simply shows EIA's change in its forecast of consumption, and shows that as consumption went down, production of petroleum products followed. It took a quarter for the petroleum industry to get the message, but then its production curve lags the consumption curve. So what do we have in the way of a summary here? Costs of producing renewable energy have been declining because of energy and technology enhancements. Long-term trends of oil and gas production are rising. They've declined shortly in the case of crude oil, but not natural gas. But because it's so easy to get tight oil, we are able to produce more than we consume, and that makes the US a net exporter today, which creates new markets, international markets. It's this tight oil, these terrestrial deposits, that account for the majority of growth in petroleum production, and natural gas production in the Marcellus, the Niobrara, and the Permian, especially the Marcellus over in the Northeast has been a real significant factor for energy production there. Let me see. I guess I advanced the chart a little too quickly. I should have begun by saying that America has become a prolific producer of oil and natural gas, as we've already seen, and natural gas is growing quite rapidly. The pandemic has resulted in the surplus of capacity, and production of crude oil has had to decline consequently. But industrial demand for electric energy is still growing, and we've seen that electric power plants are more and more being supplied by natural gas. And one reason for that is that the cost of natural gas production has been coming down. The cost of producing refinery products, such as gasoline, has come down, but that's because the crude oil is so much less expensive due to surplus supplies. And you've already seen these conclusion points. Prices for oil and gas should start rising again next year in 2021 as the economy begins to recover. So that will add to the demand for both oil and gas, but the demand for natural gas will grow even faster as coal-fired electric plants are decommissioned and natural gas takes coal's place, which is good ecologically because natural gas is a cleaner fuel than coal. Now, I don't want to go too far in that statement because ecologists will tell us that natural gas combustion also produces greenhouse gases. It just produces a lot less than coal combustion. But I'm sure that the ecologists would tell me very quickly that they prefer solar and wind powered generation to any kind of petroleum. Unless we find a way to take the greenhouse gas, particularly carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide from those plants and sequester it somehow, or make use of it in chemical production. But if we're going to keep using those fuels eventually, we're going to have to find a way to capture the effluents and make some economic use of them, or at least keep them from harming the atmosphere. So renewable energy sources are growing in importance and preference, and the projection we saw is that as time passes, the engineering and design of solar power generating equipment could result in a tripling of its importance between now and 2050. The good news in any event is that prices for electric power that you and I buy for our homes, as well as the electric power that is consumed commercially, is declining and will continue to do so, even though there will probably be short periods of increasing prices due to the cost of decommissioning coal plants and building new plants powered by natural gas. As automobiles are powered more by batteries with longer lives, then the utilization, the consumption of electric cars as opposed to cars powered by internal combustion engines will increase. And to the extent that that takes place, will benefit in the quality of our atmosphere. Nevertheless, the projection is that even by 2030, 70% of automobiles will still be powered by gasoline and hybrid engines. And here are some references that you might want to take a look at if you're interested. These are documents that are produced by the Economic Information Agency, and I think you will find them to be quite helpful. So let me see now whether I can get this this device to let me this video is over. I just have to figure out, there we go, how to there we are, how to stop it, and I just did. So that ends this rather long video on energy. It's an extremely important trend and will drive everything from the utilization of electric power in cars and our homes, as well as machinery and equipment that are used in factories, and the motors that drive so many of the devices that we use every day. So this is an extremely important part of our series of videos on market trends and drivers. Changes in power sources will be in a very important drivers of market conditions in the future. And so with that, I am going to end this video. Our next video will be the last one, and it will deal with 3 issues: climate change, international conflict, and education. And altogether, they'll probably take about the same amount of time that this video did. So until then, goodbye.